Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Mr. Wiz here. If you are new to my channel, this is where I teach people how to build video games. I am a video game coding teacher, a public school teacher, and I am sharing my lessons online for free with you all. In fact, I just finished the course that taught you guys how to build games in MakeCode Arcade. And I will share a link to the playlist probably up in this corner somewhere. So if you haven't checked those out, you should definitely do so. For this series that I'm working on now, I'm going to be teaching the extensions, the recommended extensions, and also some that are not recommended, but that I personally recommend you check out. So this will be a long series here as I dive deeply into all these extensions that I know and love personally. So today we're going to be looking at the multiplayer extension. So before we get started, I want to show you guys an example of a multiplayer game that one of my students made just this last year. If you saw, I did already make a video on how to build 4-player online multiplayer games and also how to play them. So if you haven't checked that out, you should check out that lesson. So this will be showing the comparison between the standard way of building it and then using the extension and the benefits of that. So this is a 4-player online game. Of course, I'm just playing with myself right now. But in this game, you've got the 4 players in the 4 corners. So I have the red, blue, orange, and green players. And you move around the map and you shoot at the Titan, which is the white character in the middle. And the goal is that the 4 of you together defeat the character. And it's a pretty hard game, and I just lost already. But the 4 players, each of them have 3 lives each. And the goal is to defeat the boss who has quite a lot of lives before all 4 of you die. And of course, in this case, the 4 characters did die. So let's take a look at their code, and then I'm going to look at the extension and how you would do something similar with the extension. So if I look at the code here that Jamoris and Alex wrote for this game, first thing I want you to notice is that they created the sprites for the red character, the blue character, the orange character, and the green character. They named the sprites player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4. They did that to stay organized, right? But they could have named them anything. So they created the sprites, they named the sprites. Just giving them the names player 1, player 2, player 3, and player 4 does not make them player 1, player 2, player 3, and player 4. You following me? Those are just names. Down here, they set up the code for them, of course. They set the positions. They gave them stay in screen block. They created the boss here. And then they gave them the movement controls, where it says player 1 move, player 2 move, player 4 move, and player 3 is down here for some reason. But they got the movement controls here. Now, here's where they're actually start using multiplayer controls. Where it says player 1, player 2, player 4, and down here where it says player 3, those are the multiplayer controls. So the red bubble is simply the name of the character, but these are where you're actually using multiplayer. And then for the lives, they set player 1's life, player 2's life, player 3's life, and player 4's life here. But there's nothing in this code that connects the sprite named player 1 to the player 1's life. So it's up to the programmer to make that connection, right? And that's why naming them that way did help them in this case to keep things organized. Because if they had named the 4 characters, Bob, Susan, Jake, and Fred, they'd have to remember which one was player 1, which one was player 2, which one was player 3, and which one was player 4, right? So by naming them this way, that was a very smart move for them to help them stay organized. Okay, then in their code, they have here where their lives equal 0. So when player's 1 life equals 0, destroy the sprite named player 1. When player 2's life equals 0, destroy the sprite named player 2. And they had to do that with all 4 players, right? So that's what I wanted to notice here. That's the big idea that I wanted you to see. Over here, when the player gets hit by one of the enemy's projectiles and he loses a life, well, they had to make the overlap code that says if the sprite that gets hit is player 1, then change player 1's life by -1. If the sprite that is hit is the sprite named player 2, then change player 2's life by -1, right? So there's a lot of work. This isn't a complicated code. There's a lot of work that was involved here. Here's the A button controls. So they had to do an A button control for player 1. They had to do an A button control for player 2, for player 3, and for player 4. So the big thing I want you to notice is that everything they're doing 4 times because they're doing it for each player, right? And they're also having to be very careful to make sure that the right player is mentioned and named when they're doing these things. It's very easy to get them mixed up if you're not careful. So let's look at how the extension helps with this and helps minimize this problem. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new program. I'm just going to call it multiplayer game. And I'm going to use the extension. So the extensions, if you're not familiar with them, they're in the toolbox right over here down next to advanced. You have extensions. So there are a lot of extensions in here. There's the controller extension, which I've never used. I don't really know much about that, so I won't be making a video about that one. There's the animation extension, which this extension just adds a few extra features to what you can do with animation. Once again, I've never really had any use for it. I don't find it particularly helpful in any of my games, so I won't be making a deep dive on that one. But we're going to look at the multiplayer extension today. So once you click on it, it adds this new section in the toolbox called multiplayer. And this one, right away, as you look through it, it's not going to look particularly that crazy. Most of these blocks look pretty familiar to blocks we already have. And actually, what you're going to notice using this extension is that there's nothing you can do with this extension that you couldn't have done on your own without it, right? So that game we just looked at was a perfectly good 4-player online multiplayer game. We could build something very similar with the extension. The only difference is it won't need as much code. That's the big advantage of this extension, is that it simplifies your code. And the main way it does that is by assigning sprites to the players. So instead of us as the coders having to keep track of which sprite is for which player, it happens all at once. So what I mean by that is I'm just going to go ahead and create my 4 players. So I'm going to use this green block that says set player 1 sprite 2. I'm going to put that on my on start. And I'm going to do that for all 4 players that are going to be in my game. So I've got player 1, player 2, player 3, and player 4. And I'm going to go ahead and give them pictures. And I'm just going to grab some from the gallery to keep it quick and simple for us. So we'll do the red shirt. We'll do the pink-haired princess. We'll do this guy, and we'll do one more girl here. All right, so I've got my 4 characters, and these blocks make it easy because they're already assigned the sprite to the player. So I don't have to worry about which sprite is which player, right? Now, I do need to give them controls. The original way of doing it was with this block. But with this block, I have to set the player and set the sprite. Instead, with the multiplayer, all I have to do is the one block that says move player 1 with buttons, and then do the same thing for player 2, player 3, and player 4. So I don't have to assign it to the sprite because the sprite's already assigned to it. And just like the regular move blocks, I can control the speed in the VX or the VY. I'm not going to worry about that today. All right, so I've got my 4 sprites and I've got their controls. And to test them, I can click on these 4 icons. One of the cool things about this is you're going to notice that the 4 icons actually changed to match the sprites, which is just kind of a neat little thing that I like. So you can quickly tell who's who. So with player 1, controls work. If I want to play as player 2, I just click on it, and now I'm playing as player 2. And now I'm playing as player 3, and now I'm playing as player 4. Of course, that's just for testing. If I post this game, you will have to host it and share the link with people, like I talked about in the multiplayer lesson. Okay, so I've got my 4 characters, and they work. So let's take a look at this here. So the next thing I want to look at is these bubbles here, specifically these 2. So any of the code that we've used before, you can still use with this extension. But you do have to use this bubble right here to signify which sprite you're doing. So for instance, if I want to set these sprites' positions, right now they're all starting in the middle of the game. If I want to move them to the corners, like that last game had, I'm going to have to set their position, like I did right here. The multiplayer block does not have a set position block. So I would have to use the original set position block. But what do I put in here? What do I put in that bubble? Normally, you'd put the name of the sprite, but we never actually named our sprites. None of our sprites have a name. We just assign them to the players. So I would put, instead of a name, I would put the player 1 sprite. this signifies that it's the sprite connected to player 1 that's going to go in that position. So now I can assign player 1 to go in the top left corner, and I can do the same thing for the other sprites real quick here. Player 2 will go up here. Now, of course, you can type in numbers. I'm just doing this quickly as an example. You can be more precise when you're building your game. Player 3, I'll put down here. And then player 4 sprite, I will put in the bottom right corner down here somewhere. Boom. All right, so now we start our game, and the 4 players start in their respective corners, right? And they can all use their own controls, which I can control testing it by clicking on their icon. So already it's simplified our code just by connecting the sprites to the players and not having me to do all those extra lines. So if we look at the Titan boss, to do these same things, creating the sprite, setting the buttons and positions, there were more blocks involved. So we had to create the sprite, we had to set the position, we had to do that. It was just, I don't know, it's more complicated, I feel like. So this simplifies the process a little bit just by assigning it. But that's not where the most benefit comes from. The most benefit comes from later on. Remember in the Titan boss, we had to do 4 different blocks for a button press. We had to do 4 different blocks for when the life equals 0. So we had 4 different A button presses. We had 4 different life equals 0. We had to, when we did the overlap code, we had to be real careful about which sprite was which. So yeah, let's actually start working on that. So let's go to the multiplayer again. And we're going to go ahead and give them scores. So we'll start with, oh, I'm sorry, not score, life. I'm going to give them all 3 lives to start with. And just like we did before, I'm not worried about the name of the sprite. I'm just assigning each sprite their own number of lives. And it puts it in their corners, and that's all great. And I can do the same thing for score. If I wanted to give them all 0 points to start with, I could do that. Okay, so now let's actually do A button press. So for A button press, if I want something to happen here, I want you to notice it says on A button press for player. It doesn't say which player. You following me? It just says A button press for player. So if I want them to do an action, maybe I want them to shoot a projectile, maybe I want them to do something else, whatever I put in here, I would use this as a temporary variable for that action. So let me give an example of something that's just easy to demonstrate. Let's put, what would be easy to show? Oh, let's put a say block. And we'll do 1 second. So when A button is pressed for a player, I want that player to say hello, just so we can see that it works, right? So right here is normally where we would name our sprite, but as we already mentioned, none of these sprites have names, so that's not going to help us. Now, could I put player in here? I could try, but you see it doesn't work because it's looking for a sprite in there, and these players are not sprites. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So what we do is we go to the multiplayer section again, and this time we're grabbing this bubble, the one that says my sprite player. Basically this, wait, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. That's not the right one. It's the player 1 sprite. That's what I meant. The same one we used before. Put that in there, and then I replace where it says player 1 with the temporary variable for player. So what does this mean? This means that if the A button is pressed for any of the players, that player's sprite will say hello for 100 milliseconds, which is 1 second. So let's test it out. I'm going to take my red character down. I'm going to press A, and he said hello. I switched players to the blue. Press A, he said hello. Player 3 says hello. Player 4 says hello. So this one block works for all 4 players instead of creating 4 separate blocks, which we would have had to have done the older way. Same thing with things like on player connected. If you wanted something to happen when the player joined, this would be a great example. Oh, this would be good. We could have actually saved ourselves time. Let's get rid of these 4 blocks. simplify this a little bit, I could put the life part in here. And I can also put score in here. I forgot on player connected was an option. So I want the score to start at 0. I want their lives to start at 3. So when any player connects, I want these things to happen right away. But I don't just want it to happen to player 1. I want it to happen to all the players. So once again, we're going to drag and drop and replace player 1 with the temporary variable player. Now, when any player joins, so when player 2 joins, look, it gives them a score of 0 and 3 hearts. When player 4 joins, it gives them the same thing. When player 5, I'm sorry, did I say 4 and 5? You guys get what I'm saying here. So now as soon as the player joins, it gives them these things. And once again, less code. All right, let's see what else we got. We will get to this eventually. I'm trying to remember when we'll use that one. So we did on A button press. We did player connect. So down here, you've got things like score. We've got change score by. We've got on score, on life equals 0. So on life equals 0, the player should die. We saw in that example, the other game the students made, they had to make 4 of these. Here we can only make, we can get by with only making 1. So we would use the destroy. And once again, we can't use my sprite. We would have to use the player sprite. And boom. Now, if any of the players' lives equals 0, it will destroy that sprite, right? So again, just simplifying the code by a ton. We could do when score equals a certain amount, since each player has their own score, we can grab this game over block and that player would win, right? Pretty straightforward. We can use overlap codes. So let's say that our game had an enemy in it. Let's just go ahead and create an enemy real quick. The enemy is not part of the multiplayer, so we'll just use a regular block for that. And we'll make him a ghost. And I'll switch the kinds to enemy. So we have an enemy in the middle of the screen, and when the players touch the enemy, I want something bad to happen, right? So let's create the overlap code for that. And of course, we can imagine that maybe the enemy is chasing them, or maybe he's shooting at them. You can make your game however you want to make it. But we're going to use the regular standard overlap code for this because our multiplayer section did not have overlap codes. So we're using the standard one. When a player overlaps with an enemy, we want that player to lose a life, right? So we are going to use, once again, change life by -1, and we need to replace this using this temporary variable. So we have a different temporary variable now. This one is not referring to the player. This is referring to the sprite. So I need something that associates it with the player. That is where we use this. This is what I was forgetting. Okay. So basically, we replace where it says my sprite with this temporary variable sprite. Hope I didn't lose you there. So basically what this is saying is that when a sprite that is a player kind overlaps with a sprite that is an enemy, change that sprite's player's life by -1. So this just changed the whole thing, and we can test it out, and I can grab any of these sprites, and when I touch them, they will lose their lives. Oh, so of course he died because he actually lost all 3 lives. Normally we would need something else to happen, like one of them to maybe move, right? So I could reset a position and I could grab, wait, no, that's not right. What would I put there? I need to put a sprite there. Oh, I just put that. Duh. I'm overthinking it. So when a sprite of kind player overlaps with another sprite, change that sprite player's life by -1, and then change that sprite's position to wherever I decide to respawn them at. Maybe they respawn at the top of the screen. Maybe I put some random blocks in there to make it more random. So let's go ahead and test it out. Player 1 touches the ghost, loses 1 life, and respawned at the top. Player 4 touches the ghost, loses 1 life, and respawns at the top. It works, right? And of course, if they lose all 3 lives, the game ends, or I'm sorry, that player is destroyed. Let's show off the score thing here. So we said on score 10, the player will win. Just to give a quick example of that, instead of making the enemy bad, let's make the enemy good, and they'll get a point instead. Here, we'll give them 5 points, so they have to touch it twice to win. All right. So player 1 touches it once, gets 5 points, touches it twice, wins. If I reset the game, this will work for all 4 players. It's always important when you're making a multiplayer game to test it with all 4 players, but there we go. You see how quickly and easily I'm able to throw together a 4-player multiplayer game with this extension? Basically, it's 4 times less coding, right? I'm doing 25% as much coding as I would have had I done it the other way, because I'm only getting away with using 1 block instead of 4 in many of these cases. All right, is there any other blocks in here that I should show you guys? Move with buttons, button press. Of course, these you can use with regular logic. These are pretty self-explanatory. Oh, player indicators. All right, let's look at that real quick. So player indicators is kind of a fun thing, especially if your 4 players maybe look a lot alike and you're afraid characters might get confused. You can turn player indicators on, and now they all say player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4. Couldn't be any simpler, right? So now everybody knows who they are. Problem is, of course, I can't see the dialogue as well, but maybe my game doesn't need dialogue. But this is just kind of a fun way, especially if your characters look similar, to tell them apart by using indicators. Okay, I think I've made this video long enough. I hope you learned something new in here and you are ready to build some cool multiplayer games. If you do build something you want to share with me, please put the link in the comments. You get the link by clicking on this button up here at the top. Change the name of your game, click Share Project, copy that link, and post it in the comments for me to check out. And don't forget, you can also share your games with friends and family by hosting a multiplayer game, right? Okay. Next time, I will do some more extensions. I got a lot of videos planned, so I hope you join me for some of those. I will put a link also to Titan Boss in the description so you can play that game if you want to with your friends or family. All right, until next time, have a great rest of your day.